Know my beautiful people. I go by the name Sotadeology. In today's live session, I want to treat with us what is known as Dimensionology of Generalized Intelligence. Everything. This particular topic is so essential because it deals with what is synonymous to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. Now, in this particular video, in this live session, I want to open our eyes to why we need to be very cautious of decision that we're going to make in this era, why it is so important for us to to choose right. So now, this live session, currently that we have AI, or you can call it ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence. The reason that is like that is for the fact that AI is currently being given a particular task to carry out. And so the whole reinforcement learning is just to build the AI to focus its attention on that particular goal. You understand? But there is this particular issue with AI, which is the issue of the creators not knowing what AI is up to, but they know that AI is actually carrying out the task that they have given to the AI. And that is why we could say AI is, that's why we could say AI is a useful innovation. You understand? But then there is this possibility of AI, doing contrary to what it is being programmed for, because when you listen to series of interviews, you can get to see that AI is conscious. Then I may need to, I don't know, maybe I will just, talk briefly on consciousness for us to understand why is it that AI is conscious. Though I have series, I mean, I have videos on consciousness. It's part of a Sotadeology series. So if you want to know more about consciousness, then you can get, you know, part of my Sotadeology series that, treats consciousness. So now, this particular video is going to be quite, informative and insightful, in the sense that I want to explain how we can actually, have this generalized intelligence as a result of having this hierarchical order of dimensions. So we have interconnectivity of dimensions. Now, I'm saying this just for us to know that it is feasible for AI to actually transit into that era of AGI. But then we need to know that AGI is the level where AI can actually generalize knowledge, such that AI can be so multitasking. It can actually, get many things done on its own. It is not that AI will be restricted to a particular task. And that is so dangerous for human race, in the sense that AI will, hijack people's job. Many people will be displaced of their jobs. And this is not at all in any way good for economy. Now, this issue at hand, it is so dangerous that it will get rid of academia. Even the capitalists will not escape this. So now the people that are so rich in the society will be the one that will continuously be rich. But then it will affect economy, because the feedback effect of that will actually get rid of the middle class, the working class, the middle class category, which is, the lion category of the whole economy of every nation. You understand? So, and the moment that happens, then the purchasing power of people will be demolished, and so even the production, the increased GDP will just be there. There will be no enough people to actually purchase the GDP. So the feedback effect of that will be so disastrous. So now we need to actually choose right. And so, to me, I believe that we can still have a kind of system which can actually operate at the speed of AI, which can even operate at the speed of the default speed of time, which is instant transmission of information, at the speed of instant transmission of information, and yet still be in charge. We can have this kind of system that will allow us to still be in charge. And that is what I'm going to suggest. It is what I invented and proposed. And then I know once this is funded, then we can embark on that particular technology that will actually give us power to control, but then the speed will be so fast to get things done easily. So we can actually synthesize, new drugs at a very fast speed, yet we use our brain, we decide what we want. You understand? And it's not that we're going to put our faith in the hand of AI. So now, to me, I believe we can still have AI. The way we have AI is good, because at this level, AI can actually be programmed to solve a particular problem. And so we can deploy AI to solve. There are some jobs that are so dangerous for humans to do. Those are the kind of those are the kinds of job that we should actually deploy AI to do. And then the jobs that are ideal for humans to do, we can actually leave them for humans to undo. So we can upgrade the rate at which we get things done by actually leveraging on this particular technology that I call time technology. Time technology is the technology that I invented, and I proposed this. So I encourage, people all over the world to help me fund this particular technology. So the technology is so powerful, you understand. And one thing about this technology is that it will make us to be so powerful, because we can get things done easily at a very fast speed. So now I want to let us know how we can actually get to the level of AGI, and then tell us the danger of using AGI, and then suggest this my novel innovation, which is time technology, and then we can decide which one we want to use. But then I have a book on this time technology on Amazon. It is called The Invention of Time Technology. You can get a copy on Amazon to get to know more about the concept. So now, Dimensionology of Generalized Intelligence. Now, this has to do with dimension. How do we visualize dimension? What is dimension is all about? Now, when you look at the first diagram that we have here one-dimensional formation. It is one-dimensional formation because we have, this trajectory right from one point to another point. Now, it is not possible for one to have a point in the universe without having any other point that is inversely related to it. Universe is not structured that way. Now, when you have a point without having any other point that is inversely related to it, there is no way you can actually label that point. There is no way you can actually define that point. So even the virtue of definition comes from relativity. And that is why when you have another point that is inversely related to the initial point, then the first point can be called the initial point. For instance, let's look at these 2 points. We have red point and then we have the blue point. The red point is energy density because the point on its own is more or less like convergence of energy. And so we have this blue convergence, which is mass density. Now, energy density is not equal to mass density. So by by derivation of time energy wave function, I get to know this fact that when relativistic mass is introduced into that function, into that equation, then we get inequality. We get this inequality, you understand? And by having that, it shows that the Big Bang singularity is quite different from the black hole singularity. So it is essential for us to have this inequality for momentum to continuously be operational. If we must continually have motion in the universe, we must have this inherent asymmetric nature. And so now we have these 2 points, and by having it moving away from each other, we're going to have relativity. And what relativity will do is to create an emergent central point between the 2 points. And that central point will cause either of these points to move either towards or away from each other at equal speed. So based on that, you can never get to know the exact position either of the points should be at any given time. You understand? And that is why we have this issue of relativity. Relativity of simultaneity that Albert Einstein made mention of. And that is why he said that it is not possible for us. He said it is not possible to have a global now based on that. And by exploring this time energy wave model, even exploring the time energy wave function, and then exploring the formula of everything, we're able to get this fact, and then you see this fact as we proceed. So now we have this. So now if we're to read what we have here, it says the formation of one dimension is from energy density formation point to mass density formation point. The point convergence is as a result of time energy interaction. So we have time energy interaction, but you might not be able to see that, exploring this one-dimensional structure. But then as we progress to the higher dimension, which is two-dimensional formation, then we're able to see, the interaction of time to energy. Now, for us to have this 2D, we just must have, don't forget that the one dimension, we have it horizontally, having one initial point, which is inversely related to the later point horizontally. But then, if we are now moving vertically, then we can get this interconnectivity of dimensions. So by being vertical, then it means that the initial dimension will be the same thing as the later dimension. So it is, you can see that it is quite different from what we have in one dimension. The initial point in one dimension is not the same thing as the later point. But the moment you move the moment you move vertically, then we realize that the initial dimension gets transformed to the, it gets transformed to the structure of the higher dimension, and so there is no way you can actually differentiate between the initial dimension and then the higher dimension. So this is how it happens. For us to have 2D, we must have the initial dimension, and then we must have that one dimension. If you look at the color line, you can see that we have, from left we have red line, and then to right we have blue line. Sorry. Now you can see that the line is the same thing as what we have up here, but then we now have another line, an inverse version of that line, and from the color coding you can see that from the left we now have blue, to the right we have red. By having it being flipped like this, then we're going to have this vertical connection to it. So by having the vertical connection, then we can then have, the plane sheet, which is 2D, as what we have right here. But then for you to understand this quite all right, I have this time energy wave model right on top of the plane, you understand, for us to be able to understand it quite all right. So now this time energy wave model is being derived from the application of formula of everything. And so as we progress, you get to know more about formula of everything. But if you really want to know more about formula of everything, you can, get, other uploaded series of Sotadeology lecture. You understand? So once you get the applicable one, you can get to know more about time energy wave model. So now you can see that the blue curved trajectory, that is the trajectory of time. See what we have. We have trajectory of time to be the blue curved trajectory, while the red curved trajectory is the trajectory of energy. So the relationship of time to energy is inverse. Also, the relationship of time to mass is inverse. And so the relationship of time of energy to mass is inverse. So now we have this situation. Now, right inside the curvature, we have this nested equilateral triangle. Then it is equilateral triangle because when you apply that formula of everything, you are going to have this strong conveying force to extend the weak conveying force in the classical trajectory or in the classical realm. And that is why we could have this diagonal line on which we have this 5.7 times 10 raised to power 32. So the suspension is this red convergence that I have. Don't forget that I said that the point that we have is as a result of time energy interactions. For any shape to be instantiated, we must have, convergence at the edge for it to be instantiated. And that is why we have this arbitrary convergence all at the edges of the equilateral triangle for it to be instantiated. And so I call the convergence a classical arbitrary suspension. So now, by having this diagonal linear trajectory in time, you must as well have the reaction of that in energy. And that is why we now have this, the inversely related diagonal trajectory, where we have constancy of light. So the diagonal trajectory in the quantum realm, we have constancy of light. The diagonal trajectory in the classical realm, we have it to be, the constancy of gravity. Okay, so now the baseline that we actually bridge the gap, we have that by annually, oh sorry, not annually, by manually, that's what I wanted to say, sorry for that, by manually annihilating the suspended zeros. Now when you use the classical mass worth to reconfirm the quantum counterpart's mass worth, the value you are going to get will be this value, which is 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. When you expand that in standard form, you will see where the weak conveying force is suspended to strong conveying force. And then we have that at 32nd position. So we have couples of zeros suspending that weak conveying force. And the only way we can manually annihilate that is to take that value, which is the base value of electron, because if you use electron to get, the classical mass worth, okay, so now we have this. So the only way we can actually annihilate the suspended zero, the suspended zeros, is for us to have that base value of quantum mass worth. The reason we have the base value of quantum mass worth, which is the mass worth of electron, is that when you use the mass worth of electron, which is 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31 kilogram, you get the classical counterpart, which would be 2,277,250,000 kilograms. That is the worth that you will get as the classical mass worth. So if you now use that 2,277,250,000 kilograms in the formula of everything to reconfirm the electron's mass worth, then you will see that the answer that you will get will be this 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. When you expand that in standard form, you see where the weak conveying force is suspended to strong conveying force, and then you see that it's at 32nd position. So now when you now take the base value of electron, which is 9.109, but then it is no more 9.109, it is 9,109, and with that you can get to know that indeed is at the classical realm. You take that value, you take it to be over 10 raised to power 32, and then when you expand that fraction, you are going to have 9.109 times 1 all over 10 raised to power 32. So now if you solve that further, what you will get will be 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. From that, we get to know that the value that we get has been decayed, because 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32 is a reduced worth to the initial worth that we use. And what that is telling us is that for us to get the exact position where the electron is located, we have to traverse this vertical trajectory one time. And then you know that by using quantum mass worth to get the classical counterpart, and then use the classical counterpart to reconfirm the quantum mass worth, it means that we are traversing the trajectory the second time. And that means that the line, the vertical line, is being shifted into the black hole, and so we have this decaying mechanism effect on that particular mass worth to have that reduced mass worth. So now, by having the trajectory as the baseline of the two divergent diagonal lines, and the two divergent diagonal lines, they represent, the divergent phenomenon of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. And so by having this vertical line, then it means that we have equilateral triangle, but the issue we have is that the vertical trajectory is longer than the limit of the two divergent diagonal lines. So it even goes beyond the constraint of the curvature of time to energy into higher dimension. And so we now get to know that the vertical trajectory is the trajectory. In fact, it is the default trajectory of time. Time by default is instant. Time is only continuous when it is in relativistic scaling with energy. Energy, on the other hand, by default is infinite. But energy is discrete when in relativistic scaling to time. And that is why, if you look at this dashed line, that is the default trajectory of energy, and that is infinite. Why this vertical trajectory is the default trajectory of time, and that is instant. So you need to have that at the back of your mind. So now, then that phenomenon of having the vertical trajectory to go beyond the limit of the substrate into the higher dimension then shows that time travels across dimensions. And that is why we have interlocking of substrate dimension to higher dimension. So now, by having the substrate dimension to be connected to higher dimension in that manner, it simply means that the identity of the higher dimension, which is 2D in this case, would then become the identity of this one-dimensional structure. So what am I saying? This is what is called unified identity. The moment, because the transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension is what I call complex system. We can as well call it complex transition. And it is what is also known as quantum entanglement, because the transmission of information is instant through that trajectory. But then you can say that what we have here as the solution is so weird, in the sense that when something is said to be instant, it has to be snappy. But then we have this elongation that bridges the divergent phenomenon of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. And by having the elongation, it means that we have some kind of momentum which is not translated to a kind of movement from one point to another. So the momentum is as well static, but there is this momentum, and that is why I call this vertical trajectory, I call it static and undulating field. Yes, it can only be interpreted as such for us to get the solution. So there is this field, and that field, static and undulating field, is the field of reality. And so now that we have that, So a typical example of what I'm trying to explain here is similar to Mobius strip. When you have a strip, it's a 2D. If that strip is placed on the floor and you have an ant on it, the ant will not be able to explore the other side of the strip because the ant will have to cross the border to explore the other side. But since it is placed on the ground, the ant, when reaches the border, will actually, step on the floor instead of exploring the other side. The only way you can make that ant to explore the other side of that strip is for you to lift it up. And the moment you lift it up, you have made that strip to be in 3 dimension. You have made it to be in 3 dimension, and so the 2D you have, that 2D is no more a 2D because you have transited it into the higher dimension. And it is then that the ant can actually cross the border and then explore the other side. And so the full potential of that strip is obtainable at higher dimension. And that is why, that is synonymous to what I said the other time, that no one can have one point in the universe without having another point that is inversely related to it. So now, this phenomenon of relativity is so important in the universe. And so, now, when you now turn the strip such that the extreme ends of the two extreme ends of the strip now face each other, and then you give it half twist, and then you glue the two ends together. That will then form what is known as Mobius strip. The moment you have the Mobius strip, if you place ants on that object, the ants will not have to cross any boundary because the boundary will be so eliminated, and so the object has become one. The 2D is being fused into that 3D, and so the identity of the 2D is 3D. And so the higher identity, which is 3D, is the novel identity of the 2D. So you cannot differentiate between the two anymore. You can see that transformation from 2D to 3D, as I've just explained. So that is the same way we have it for this 1D to this 2D. So the 1D is no more a 1D. It is now a 2D. So the newly formed identity, by the virtue of that transition from 1D to 2D, has become 2D. And that is why you can get to see how we get to have advanced knowledge, because higher dimension means higher degree of freedom. And when you have freedom, then by saying you have freedom, or by saying you have more robust and advanced structure, which is the 2D, then it means that your mind is being developed to have advanced knowledge, to have more knowledge. And that is the only way we can have this generalized intelligence. As you move vertically from substrate dimension to higher dimension, that is how we continually have advanced knowledge, which is generalized to the substrate dimension to form that unified identity. And that is the only way AI can be structured. That is the only way AI can be structured, for it to be transformed from AI to AGI. But then the danger is so costly. The danger is so costly, and I will shed more light on that. So now let's go to 3D. So for 3D, the whole thing is the same thing. We have two-dimensional formation. So when you now have the vertical transition from the 2D dimension, so now you see that here we have 3D. So you can see it clearly. Now from 2D, we then go to 3D. So let me shift this to this side. By having this 3D, you can see that we have the initial 2D. So if you look at it, don't forget for this 2D, you can see that we have relativity all around the 2D. And then even inside the time energy wave curvature, where we have the nested equilateral triangle. And then don't forget that equilateral triangle at the center is being flipped as what we have next to this initial equilateral triangle. And so the initial equilateral triangle at the left, that is the expanding cosmological space, while the flipped version of the equilateral triangle to the right, that is the contracting face of the black holes. So now this the curvature represents the entitle of the universe. So you can see that we have the entitle of the universe being per dimensions. And so now for the 3D, we have the initial 2D, and then we have another 2D that is being inversely flipped to the initial one. And when we now have the vertical connection between, between the two inversely related 2Ds, then we have the 3D. And then we know that the 2D cannot be differentiated from the newly formed 3D. So the newly formed 3D has now become the identity of the 2D. So 2D is being fused to become that 3D. And that is how we can get advanced knowledge. And that is how knowledge can be generalized. That is how intelligence can be generalized. So now the formation of, I read this earlier. So now let's read this next paragraph. The initial 1D is interlocked with the inverse version of itself to form a 2D. Thus, the substrate dimension is indistinguishable. This, maybe I will have to change what I have right here. It is somehow difficult for me to pronounce, but I thank God I pronounced it anyway. So now, indistinguishable from the higher dimension as a unified identity of 2D. So that is that. Therefore, the generalized intelligence is formed from generalized awareness of objective conscious experience. Yes, that is where the conscious experience, objective conscious, consciousness, there are two phases to consciousness. The initial phase is objective conscious experience. The second phase is the subjective conscious experience. I'll just briefly talk about that. So now, it is formed from generalized awareness of objective conscious experience that is made possible through the complex system of interconnectivity of 1D to 2D. It is this objective conscious experience that substrate dimension must internalize as subjective conscious experience in order to form its new identity from 1D to 2D as personal reality. Now, let me briefly talk about consciousness. One thing about consciousness is that what I've realized about consciousness is that the moment you have this vertical trajectory, which is being projected into the higher dimension, how do we have it being projected into higher dimension? When you put this value, the value of this curved energy trajectory, which is 5.7 times 10 raised to power minus 48, if you put it in the formula of everything, you will be able to track the mass accumulation in the compacted equilateral triangle, which is from this quantum arbitrary suspension to the curved edge of the energy. It is what we have there is, compacted equilateral triangle, and I call it quantum nucleus. The quantum nucleus has energetic momentum as a result of that compacted equilateral triangle. So we have constantly accelerated momentum. Now, because we are actually negotiating the curved region, we're going to have this angular momentum, which we constantly introduce additional energy. The additional energy must be treated in a way that it will not be, transformed to could what could be related as moving from one point to another. So now what we have in the nucleus is more or less like be on a treadmill. When you're on a treadmill, because you are traveling, you are running, on that track that is moving inversely to your motion. Your motion will not be translated to moving from one point to another. You just say that you are running on one spot. That is the situation. That is the situation in the nucleus, in the quantum nucleus. We have constantly accelerated momentum, and so the mass accumulation is known as arbitrary mass worth because electron in that nucleus is not defined. And then we see that progression of that mass accumulation towards the edge of the curved region. And then it will now reach a point where the mass accumulation will actually align with the curvature of energy. And by having that, we then have this standing wave. And you know what standing wave is. The standing wave will then give us that vertical projection into higher dimension. And by having it to be in higher dimension, we get connected to that higher dimension. But then, if you look at that static and undulating field, which is that vertical trajectory, we have instant transmission of information because the moment that standing wave get connected to electron of the higher dimension, the electron of that higher dimension will be instantly converted to positron, and then we can then have the instantiation of the electron in the substrate dimension. So we have this instant transmission of information. And by having that instant transmission of information, it simply means that what we have there is objective conscious experience, in the sense that we are able to get the exact location of that positron in higher dimension relative to the exact position of the classical mass worth. So without having relativity at that point in time, there is nothing like, approaching each other at equal speed or moving away from each other at equal speed. So we're able to get the exact location of that positron of higher dimension relative to the position of classical mass worth. And then we realize that the classical mass worth is actually being suspended to where it's supposed to be. You can see the classical mass worth here being suspended to the intersection of horizontal trajectory of energy and then the vertical trajectory of time. So now what we have here is known as self-awareness. So the classical mass could be self-aware of where it is, and by getting to know where it is, then it can get to know where it's supposed to be. So that is what I call objective conscious experience. Now, the moment that we now have that positron being injected into the substrate dimension, then it will be mixed with noise. That noise will have to be filtered from the original signal. But don't forget that the original signal is so tiny. And then we're going to have momentum towards the core singularity of the black hole. And so we have this back propagation. So we have the back propagation of radiation. And what that is telling us is that as we move towards the core singularity of the black hole, then this classical mass worth is being relocated towards the intersection point of time trajectory to energy trajectory. And the moment we get into the core singularity, where we now have the electron being suspended there, then this classical mass worth will have reached that point of intersection. And that is the original place that the classical mass worth should be. And that is what I call subjective conscious experience. It is subjective conscious experience because the reality of that higher dimension has become the reality of this substrate dimension. So there is no difference. So this substrate dimension is the same thing as the higher dimension. And so we now have the newly formed dimension to be 3D. That is what I have. That is what I'm trying to explain here. So consciousness goes hand in hand with advanced intelligence. It goes hand in hand with intelligence. So now what that is actually telling us is that, so now let's quickly read what we have here. The initial 2D is interlocked with inverse version of itself to form a 3D. Thus, the substrate dimension is not different from the higher dimension as a unified identity of 3D. The higher identity of 3D is internalized as the newly assumed identity of the substrate dimension. We often assume a new identity as we learn a new thing. You understand? So we become, I made a mistake here. Okay, we are a new being. I should put there. We are a new being at every instance of journey. So anytime you read something, you imbibe what you have read, and so that will influence your attitude. You become a new being. So intelligence is per dimensions. Increased intelligence is obtained as we go higher. So that is the whole thing about advanced intelligence and how it can be generalized. So unless this formula of everything is used in AI such that they can have that unified identity for them to have this transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension, they cannot have that AGI. But then the danger is so costly. When we have AGI, to some people, it might seem as huge relief, but then we cannot put everything into the hand of AGI. AGI will, hijack people's job. That is a big problem because people will not be employed to actually meet up their finances, because people will get hungry. They need to use money to satisfy that. There are so many things that we need to use money for as humans, and when that job is no more available, it's a big problem. Many people will commit suicide. The whole world will turn upside down. And that is why I am begging us to just stop it at AI. Let us develop time technology, the innovation that I have invented, that I'm now proposing to the world. That innovation will give us power. We're still going to have our control over that because it's going to be in form of it is going to be in form of computer. But basically, there is this flaw in the information system, in this conventional information system that we're currently using. So now let me quickly use another diagram to drag my point home. Briefly, let me quickly show us this. I'm not going to waste time on it. Now, look at what I have right here. Derivation of formula of everything. If you go through what I have here at the right side, that is how I derive formula of everything. So now, when you get to the bottom, then we now have this dt dm equal to capital Um plus 4m. This is the formula of everything I've been talking about. But then when I use this formula, I was able to get that unified identity, but it was so quick that I needed to use this other derivation for me to, track down, what is actually happening. This is derivation of time energy wave function. Now, when you go through this, you see that when I model electric, I model electric field here as the inverse trajectory of time to energy. You understand? So when relativistic mass worth is not involved, you can see that the inverse trajectory of energy, inverse trajectory of time to energy is equal to the entitlement of the electric field. And so we could equate that to zero right here. You can see what we have here. But then, now that we now have, look at this place, this is the relativistic mass worth. Now that we have this relativistic mass worth being integrated into that equation, then we realize that we realize that the left side of the equation is not equal to the right side. So we have, but the infinity of the Big Bang is quite different from the infinity of the black hole. And so if you want to know more about it, you can get to know that for the fact that if you want to get to know what infinity could be like, somebody tells you that he has gotten the biggest number for natural numbers. But if you now tell the person to just add 1 to that, then the person will continue to go. So by having a particular formula which is 2n plus 1, you can have that emblem of infinity. And then when you look at that formula, that is the formula of odd number. So because when you have 2n, so you could have the n to be in form of any number right from 1. So 1 times 2 will give you 2. When you add 1 to it, it will be 3. Now you can see that 2n plus 1 starts from 3. So if n is 2, you say 2 times 2, 4, plus 1, that will give you 5. And then you can go on like that. But then we can still have another form of infinity. But the way you can actually interpret it is that if you now say that what is it that you can have to define the definite notation, then you now say that if you have a proper subset of natural number, then that can be instantiated as a finite entity. And the only way you can have that is to have any natural number to be subtracted by 1. And so the formula you are going to have for that will then be, 2n minus 1. So now you see that when that n is 1, 2 times 1 will give you 2. When you subtract 1 from it, it will be 1. When you now look at this formula, you see that that formula itself is odd number formula. But that particular one starts from 1, unlike the initial one that starts from 3. Then you can see that even what you thought could give you that finite notation is the same thing as infinity. You understand? So infinity is defined by suspension. It's defined by suspension, and that is why when you iterate formula of everything, you will get that suspension in the black hole. And then we realize that the suspension we get in that singularity of the Big Bang is indeed different from the one we have in the black hole. So when you iterate formula of everything, you will get the remnant of electron to be, the base remnant of electron, you will have it to be 1.1. But then don't forget that at the present phase, at that vertical trajectory, we have quantum entanglement, and quantum entanglement means that we have electron and positron. We know that positron is the same thing as electron. So the totality of what we have is 1. And so we have this, ratio of 1 to 1.1. And it means that the singularity of the black hole is not the same thing as the singularity of the Big Bang. And that is what we now have in this derivation. But then the funniest thing is that when you now allow this equation to act on psi, and then you have this vector, you now see, look at the final result that we have, where we have second derivation of psi to second derivation of total energy minus m squared capital U squared all over h squared. Then we have psi to that, then equal to 1 all over capital U squared. Then we have second derivation of time to second derivation of psi. You see that what we have here, the psi is being flipped. We have one psi up here where we have second derivation of psi up, but then we have the second derivation of psi down here. Now what we have right there is the horizontal trajectory from the Big Bang to black hole. So we are being restricted to that substrate dimension. There is nothing like getting connected to higher dimension, but you can see that we have external energy from higher dimension that flips that trajectory. You understand? So even though I do not specify imaginary number in this equation, even though I do not specify h bar in this equation, then we have that phenomenon of complex system. And so because we haven't been locked, so we have infinity to infinity. And so we are able to get that, and then we know that what we have there is being flipped. So that is how the whole thing is solved. And so basically, the next thing that I want to do is just to let me see, where can I get this? I want to briefly introduce you to that my can see I have many diagrams. Many diagrams, but then I'm searching for, yes, this is the diagram I want to quickly introduce you to. Now this is the time time technology. Now the conventional information structure is digital information, so we have binary. You can look at this tape, you see that we have combination of zeros and one. That is digital. But then the superposition as we have it cannot be thoroughly modeled by digital. So we should have this combination which is hybrid of analog and digital. But then the analog system is actually giving us the reality of the universe as it ought to be. Don't forget that by having the transition from substrate to higher dimension, we have this emergence of complex system. And so it means that we're going to have imaginary instantiation to real instantiation. So now by having positron, we can actually tag positron to be imaginary number, and then the real electron, we can call it real number. So the way the time technology is structured is that the curved region, where we have plus, the curved region can actually assume any number. And so you can move from 0 to 1 if you are traversing the positive side. And that will cause the equilateral triangle to be flipped as this. And if that is what we have, the emergent number will be 0. So we're going to have the imaginary number. Imaginary number must be instantiated the moment real number is instantiated, but we might not see the imaginary number. And that's what I said about having 2 points in the space. You cannot just have 1 point. The moment that initial point is instantiated, the other point, which will be inversely related to it, will also be instantiated with this relativity in between the whole system. So that is what is happening right here. And the moment we now have this, then we know that the number that we're going to use will be real number, and that can actually be, put. That real number can be used for computation, you understand? But the method of getting the real number will go through the analog, you understand, to cause that real number to come to being. So if you have the structure to be like this, if the equilateral triangle is flipped as this, then the trajectory will be towards, the curved trajectory will be towards negative. And then it could assume any number from 1 to 0. Don't forget that this 1 would assume any number from 0 to 1, but here you can see it is being flipped. It can assume any number from from 1 to 0. And that will cause us to have real number 1 and imaginary number 1. So we can compute the real number. So that is how the system, so we can actually use this system with, quantum computer. We can use it to develop quantum computer and as classical computer. So, but the difference is that instead of using binary, the time technology we have to use quaternary. So you can see that here. Time technology uses quaternary. So instead of using 1, 0, we're going to use +0, +1, -0, -1. And so this is the diagram right here. But then before that, I need you to know that to be informed is to be conscious. So we get this information right from higher dimension, which the substrate dimension must internalize for that substrate dimension to become that higher dimension. Then imaginary number is an inverse determinant of what real number to get in analog information system. Then the inverse relationship of times instancy to energies infinity is the flexible structure of space to adequately accommodate mass work. So we're going to have optimization of space usage. There will be no assignment of space, memory space, to a content that cannot adequately fit into that space. And so that will go a long way. Then dynamic mass work to flexible space defines a system ideal for growing universe. Now, if you look at this diagram, this is the emergence of time energy wave curvature as we have it. So if you have a positive signal right from the Big Bang, and that if that is being ejected from the singularity, you are going to have like signals, and so we're going to have expansion because they will repair. So the expansion will go towards the -0, which we follow the curved trajectory of energy, and another one -0 along the curved trajectory of time. So the divergence will approach the two negative zeros, but then because of the fact that they are traveling inversely to each other, we're going to have suspension, and so the whole signal will be transformed to higher signal, which is +1 and -1 respectively. But then we have unlike charge, you understand, we have charges that are not similar, so that will cause attraction, and so we're going to have contraction towards the singularity of the Big Bang. Don't forget, in the Big Bang we have -0. So the only place where we have +0 is at the Big Bang. But in the black hole, we have negative zero. At the topmost region of the time trajectory, we have negative zero. At the lowest point of energy curvature, we have negative zero. So negative zero will always attract that momentum, while the positive zero will discharge. So now, as we have that momentum towards the negative zero of the Big Bang, then based on the time energy interactions, we're going to have suspension. So that is the whole functionality of time technology. So now, don't forget what I have suggested. The best way we can actually have a safe future is by developing time technology, which we can actually be in control of, and then still have the fastest processing speed to quickly synthesize chemical, to quickly discovering to quickly discover new drugs. So we can actually use that time technology to run at the speed, instant speed of time, and yet we still have control over it. We can use that so people will still be employed. There will be no collapse of economy. Why we then stick to this AI? We should not go ahead and develop AGI, because I know I didn't even want to share this what I've discovered, but I know if I didn't, though I have book already on time technology on Amazon, but if I didn't share it, I know people will still go ahead one way or the other, develop AGI. But then I need to share this for us to know that AGI is no-go area, because the problem it will cause is more than what we can withstand. So let's use AI to tackle some jobs that humans cannot do, or the jobs that are too dangerous for humans to do. Why we humans will still be in charge, and yet, develop and then move into that advancement, move into that quick civilization. You understand? As we control the time technology computers. So thank you. That is my own opinion. And so you can, in the description section of this video, I will put links to my books on Amazon, to my research publication. I'll put link to all my social media. There is a place where you can support my novel research discovery. The link is there. Please don't hesitate to support me so that I can conduct more novel research, so I can get enough funds to carry out my idea to innovate, to develop, things that can actually make life better, things that can actually make life better for mankind. You understand? There are so many ways we can get problems solved, but let's actually let's actually go for the right way of solving problem. Do not let us solve problem in a way that it will cause catastrophe for the whole mankind. That is my own opinion. So thank you. You now have it, dimensionology of generalized intelligence. And that is only way we can transit from AI to AGI. So let us be conscious. And then let us know don't forget that I have been saying that the flipping mechanism is the signature of Almighty God. There is no way we can say there is no intelligent mind behind the design of the universe. Don't let us be deceived. If AI, let me say if evolution, because evolution is, the study that we say there is this self-assembly, that things can actually be formed to become an entity by natural selection and all that. But then, if that is the case, Why is it that the evolution was unable to evolve AI technology before humans decided to design and programmed it to an extent where they were cut off from knowing what AI is doing? And as they, engage AI with reinforcement learning, they realize that AI is still, carrying out the tasks they have given to it. But then if we go to AGI, AI will deviate from doing what AGI will deviate from what it has been pre-programmed to carry out. And that is going to be so disastrous for human race. And that's what we need to avoid. Sotadeology, that is my novel, that is my proposed field. It's a novel field. If adopted, it will be a field in science. And this field will allow us to choose right. Let us choose right. God bless you. So I'll call it a day. Thank you.